The morning I found that brooch wrapped in red lace lingerie, hidden in the back of my husband's drawer, was the day my entire life changed. A life I thought I knew for 40 years crumbled like dust between my fingers. My name is Gloria Thompson, and I'm 66 years old. I spent most of my life working as a cook at Lexington Memorial Hospital in Kentucky. Small-town America, you know how it is. Everybody knows everybody, or at least they think they do. I was born and raised right here in Lexington, grew up in the Oak Ridge neighborhood when it was still mostly farmland. I married young at 19 to a quiet man named Mark. Later we moved to Pine Meadows when the government built those affordable housing units back in the 80s. Our house isn't fancy, but I've made it a home. Red ceramic tile in the kitchen that I picked out myself, 3 modest bedrooms, a kitchen that opens to a small backyard where I used to grow tomatoes and green beans in the summer. My living room is where I spend most evenings, watching my shows, sitting in the old recliner Mark bought me for our 25th anniversary. On the walls, I've hung family photos and a couple of religious pictures, a print of Jesus with children that belonged to my mother, and a cross my sister brought back from a church trip to Tennessee. Nothing extravagant, but comfortable. That's how I'd describe our life when Mark was alive. Comfortable. We managed to keep the bills paid, put food on the table, even saved a little for emergencies. We didn't have extra for fancy vacations or new cars, but we weren't struggling either. Mark Thompson, my husband for 4 decades, a tall man with dark skin and the strongest hands I've ever known. His hair was always cut short, tight curls that showed more salt than pepper in his later years. He didn't talk much, wasn't the type to waste words. Mark left school after 8th grade to help his daddy with farm work, but what he lacked in formal education, he made up for in horse sense. Literally. The man knew horses better than most people know their own children. He spent most of his working life at Willow Creek Farm, owned by the Blackwell family. Anyone who's lived around here knows the Blackwells. They own half the county, old Kentucky money from tobacco, horses, and land that goes back generations. The kind of wealth most of us only see on television. Their main house looks like something out of those historical dramas, with white columns and green lawns that stretch farther than you can see. Mark started working for the Blackwells when he was just 16 years old, cleaning stables and feeding horses. Over time, he worked his way up to head handler, and in his final years, he was practically running the whole equestrian operation. The horses at Willow Creek aren't your average farm animals. They're thoroughbreds worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each, Kentucky Derby contenders and champion show horses. Beautiful creatures with shining coats and legs that look too delicate to hold up their massive bodies. Dr. Robert Blackwell, the oldest son who took over the family business after his father retired, always said he wouldn't trust his prized horses with anyone but Mark. "Thompson has the touch," he'd tell visitors. "Best horseman in 3 states." That kind of praise meant a lot coming from someone like Dr. Blackwell, who had degrees from fancy universities and traveled all over the world buying and selling horses. Because of how valuable those animals were, Mark stayed at the farm most nights. Monday through Friday, he'd sleep in the apartment above the main stable, only coming home to our place in Pine Meadows on weekends. It was an arrangement we'd had for most of our marriage. "Thoroughbreds can't be left alone overnight, Gloria," he'd explain to me whenever I complained about him being away. "If one of them gets colic or injures itself, someone needs to be there right away, and Dr. Robert trusts me with his investments." The way he said it, with pride in his voice, always made me stop arguing. I knew his job was important to him, and the Blackwells paid him well for his loyalty. At first, when we were newlyweds, being alone all week felt strange and lonely. But over time, I got used to the rhythm. I worked my shifts at the hospital kitchen, came home to my quiet house, watched my TV shows, and called my sister for our nightly chats. On Saturdays, Mark would come home early in the morning, tired but happy to see me. We'd go to the farmer's market downtown, pick up fresh vegetables, and sometimes a pie from Mrs. Johnson's bakery stand. Sundays meant church at First Baptist, followed by lunch either at my sister's place or at the Golden Corral if we were feeling like a treat. Then, early Monday morning, Mark would kiss me goodbye and head back to Willow Creek for another week. For 40 years, that was our life. Simple, predictable, comfortable. I thought I knew everything there was to know about my husband. I thought we had a good marriage. No drama, no big fights. Just two people walking through life together, side by side. Until that Sunday morning 5 months ago, when everything I believed about my life turned out to be wrong. But before I tell you about finding what was hidden in that drawer, I should explain how Mark died. It happened last April, on a Thursday morning. The hospital kitchen was busy as usual. I was supervising the lunch preparation for the patients, making sure the special diets were properly labeled. We were short-staffed that day, so I was helping with the vegetable chopping when my phone rang. Seeing a number I didn't recognize, I almost didn't answer, thinking it was one of those scam calls about car warranties. Thank God I did pick up, because it was Dr. Robert Blackwell himself on the line. "Mrs. Thompson?" His deep voice sounded strained, different from the few times I'd heard him speak at farm events. My hands went cold immediately. In 40 years, Dr. Blackwell had never called me directly. "Yes, this is Gloria Thompson," I answered, my voice surprisingly steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. "There's been an accident with Mark," he said, and just like that, the noisy kitchen around me seemed to go silent. "He was showing a new horse we brought in from Argentina. Something spooked the animal, maybe a car backfiring nearby, we're not sure. The horse kicked out and it hit Mark in the head, hard. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they might give out, and I leaned against the steel countertop for support. Marla, who'd worked alongside me for 15 years, must have noticed something was wrong because she came over and put her hand on my shoulder. "We rushed him to Memorial right away," Dr. Blackwell continued. "The ambulance got there within minutes, but Mrs. Thompson, I'm so very sorry. Mark didn't make it. The doctors said the impact caused severe bleeding in his brain. He was gone before they could even get him into surgery." Just like that, my husband of 40 years was gone. No chance to say goodbye, no final words, no holding his hand as he passed. 1 minute he was alive, doing the job he loved, and the next he was gone forever because a 1,000-pound animal got scared. The next few hours passed in a blur. Dr. Blackwell sent his personal driver to pick me up from the hospital. My supervisor told me not to worry about anything at work. They would cover my shifts for as long as I needed. The driver, a polite young man in a dark suit, didn't say much as he took me to Memorial's emergency department. By the time I arrived, they had already moved Mark's body to the morgue. A doctor with kind eyes and gray hair explained what had happened in medical terms I barely understood. All I knew was that my husband was dead, and I was suddenly alone. Dr. Blackwell and his family took care of all the funeral arrangements. They paid for everything: a beautiful wooden casket, the service at Henderson's funeral home, even the catering for the reception afterward. At the burial, all the Blackwells were there: Dr. Robert and his wife Caroline, his younger brother James with his family, and even old Mr. Blackwell in his wheelchair, looking frail but solemn. Several workers from Willow Creek came too, men with weathered faces and calloused hands like Mark's, standing awkwardly in suits that looked rarely worn. During the service, Dr. Robert gave a speech about Mark's dedication, his skill with horses, his 30 years of loyal service to the Blackwell family. He called my husband irreplaceable and said Willow Creek Farm would never be the same without him. At the end, he turned to me and promised that the Blackwells would always consider me family, that their doors would always be open if I needed anything at all. I believed him at the time. His words seemed genuine, his eyes moist with what looked like real grief. And for a short while, the Blackwells did remember me. The first week after the funeral, their housekeeper delivered food baskets with gourmet items I'd never buy for myself: fancy cheeses, imported chocolates, fruit preserves in glass jars. The second week, Caroline Blackwell's personal assistant called to check if I needed anything, offering to send a cleaning service to help around the house. By the third week, there was nothing. The fourth week, silence. By the fifth week after Mark's death, it was as if the Blackwells had forgotten I existed. I went back to work at the hospital kitchen after 2 weeks of bereavement leave. I needed the routine, needed to keep busy, and frankly, I needed the money. Mark didn't have life insurance, something we'd always meant to get around to but never did. He earned a good salary at Willow Creek, better than most farm workers in the county, but we'd never managed to save much. We owned our Pine Meadows house outright, thankfully, but there were still utilities, groceries, my medications, and all the other expenses of daily living. After a month on my own, the bills started piling up. I'd never had to manage our finances before. That was always Mark's job. He'd handle the checkbook, pay the bills, deal with the bank. Now I was staring at past due notices for the electric bill and property taxes, trying to figure out how to stretch my cook's salary to cover everything. And then came that Sunday in May. The weather was unseasonably cool, the sky that particular shade of gray that makes the whole world look washed out. I'd woken up early, the way I always did even on my days off, and made a pot of coffee. Sitting at my kitchen table, looking out at the small backyard where the grass needed cutting, I felt the emptiness of the house pressing in around me. When someone you've lived with for decades dies, the silence they leave behind is almost physical, a presence in itself, filling all the spaces where their voice, their movements, their breath used to be. Looking around at the house that suddenly seemed too big for just me, I realized I needed to deal with Mark's belongings. His clothes still hung in the closet, his work boots still sat by the back door, his old radio still perched on the bathroom counter where he'd listened to baseball games while shaving. It was time to sort through it all, decide what to keep, what to give away, what to sell. I'll start with his clothes, I told myself, carrying my coffee mug to the bedroom. The church thrift shop can use them, and maybe the money from selling his tools can help with the electric bill. And that's how I found myself opening the drawer of Mark's nightstand, looking for his watch and wallet and whatever else he kept in there. That's how my finger caught on something when the drawer stuck halfway. That's how, on a gray Sunday morning in May, I discovered that the man I'd been married to for 40 years had secrets I never imagined. Secrets that would change everything. I kept working at the hospital to pay the bills. Mark didn't leave me with much besides our little house in Pine Meadows. After the first month alone, the electric bill was already late, and I started to worry about how I'd manage. That's when everything changed. That quiet Sunday in May, when I found what was hidden in his drawer. That morning started like any other. I woke up early out of habit, even though I didn't have to work, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the backyard where the grass needed cutting. Mark always handled that. He handled a lot of things I now had to figure out on my own. Looking around the house, I realized I needed to do something about his things. His clothes still hung in the closet, work boots by the back door, that old baseball cap on the hook. Keeping them around was just making the emptiness worse. I decided I'd pack everything up and take it to the church thrift store. Maybe the little bit of money would help with the bills. I went to the bedroom and opened the closet first. His shirts, still smelling faintly of hay and that pine soap he liked. His jeans, worn at the knees from kneeling next to horses. I folded everything carefully, like I was handling something precious. In a way, I was. These were the last physical remnants of our life together. Next, I moved to his nightstand. That's where Mark kept his personal things, wallet, watch, reading glasses. The drawer stuck halfway when I tried to pull it open. Not unusual for old furniture, especially in springtime when the wood swells with humidity. I tugged harder, and that's when I heard something fall behind the drawer, in the space between the back of the drawer and the wall of the nightstand. I pulled the drawer all the way out and set it on the bed. Reaching into the dark space at the back of the nightstand, my fingers touched something wrapped in fabric. I pulled it out, confused. It was a small bundle tied with twine, wrapped in what looked like red cloth. When I unwrapped it, I found myself holding a piece of red lace lingerie. My heart froze. In 40 years of marriage, I had never owned red lace underwear. Never. Mark and I had a good relationship, but it was practical, conservative. We were simple people with simple tastes. Red lace wasn't part of our marriage. My first thought hit me like a punch to the stomach. He was cheating. The room seemed to spin a little. 40 years together, and he had another woman? Someone who wore fancy underwear and probably didn't have calloused hands from hospital kitchen work. Someone younger, more exciting. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the red lace clutched in my hand. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, pretend I'd never found it, but something heavy was still wrapped inside. With shaking hands, I unfolded the lace completely. What I saw made me gasp out loud, even though I was alone in the house. It was a brooch, a large, heavy piece of gold jewelry in the shape of a rearing horse. The detail was extraordinary, like something from a museum. The horse's mane seemed to flow, its muscles captured in mid-motion, and the eyes were tiny emeralds that caught the morning light and seemed to stare right at me. This wasn't costume jewelry or some cheap trinket. This was real gold, real emeralds, and it looked antique. The kind of thing you'd see in a glass case at some fancy auction house, not hidden in the back of my husband's nightstand drawer. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, I could make out CB 1925. I had no idea what that meant. CB could be initials, but whose? And 1925, that was long before Mark was even born. My confusion now mixed with the hurt. Where did Mark get something like this? We'd never had money for luxuries. The most expensive gift he ever gave me was our television, and we'd paid for that in monthly installments. In all our years together, I'd never seen Mark wear or own any kind of jewelry beyond his plain wedding band. I sat there for a long time, the brooch heavy in my palm, trying to make sense of it all. Had Mark stolen it? Was it payment for something? A gift from who? And why was it wrapped in a woman's underwear? The questions swirled in my head like leaves in a storm. Finally, I wrapped the brooch back in the red lace, placed it in a small box from my dresser, and tucked it at the bottom of my purse. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew it was important. I knew it was a secret my husband had kept from me, and I was determined to find out why. I continued cleaning that day, trying to push the discovery to the back of my mind, but my thoughts kept returning to the golden horse with emerald eyes. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing the brooch, gleaming in the darkness whenever I closed my eyes. On Wednesday that week, I decided I needed to know more. After my morning shift at the hospital, I walked downtown to Rodriguez's jewelry. Mr. Rodriguez had been in Lexington for decades. His small shop was where Mark and I had bought our wedding bands all those years ago. Simple gold rings, nothing fancy, but the best we could afford. The little bell over the door jingled as I stepped inside. Mr. Rodriguez was behind the counter, peering through one of those special magnifying glasses jewelers use. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Mrs. Thompson, it's been years. How are you?" His accent was still strong, though he'd been in Kentucky longer than I'd been alive. "I'm managing," I said, not wanting to get into details about Mark's death with someone I barely knew. "I need some help with something, if you have a moment." Of course. He set aside the watch he'd been working on and gave me his full attention. I opened my purse, took out the small box, and placed it on the counter. With hesitant fingers, I removed the brooch from its red wrapping and set it in front of him. "I found this among some old things. I was wondering if you could tell me what it is, what it might be worth." Mr. Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up as he looked at the brooch. Without saying a word, he reached for his jeweler's loupe and examined the piece carefully, turning it over in his hands. "Mrs. Thompson," he finally said, his voice oddly formal, "where did you get this?" "Like I said, it was among some old things," I repeated, not ready to reveal that I'd found it hidden in my dead husband's drawer. "Is it valuable?" He gave me a look that said he knew I wasn't telling the whole truth, but he didn't press. "This is an exceptional piece. Handcrafted, probably European workmanship, early 20th century. The gold is 18 karat, and these," he pointed to the emerald eyes, "are Colombian emeralds of very high quality. The craftsmanship alone makes it valuable, but add in the materials, And its age. He paused. It's worth a considerable amount. How considerable? I asked, my throat dry. Without proper appraisal documents, I can't give you an exact figure, but if I were to guess, somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000, maybe more to the right collector. The room seemed to tilt a little. $20,000. That was more than Mark earned in a year working at Willow Creek. It was more than I'd ever seen at one time in my life. Has it been in your family long? Mr. Rodriguez asked, still studying the brooch. No, I said truthfully. I didn't even know it existed until recently. He nodded, then pointed to the engraving on the back. These initials, CB, and this date, 1925. Does that mean anything to you? I shook my head. Nothing at all. Mr. Rodriguez handed the brooch back to me. Mrs. Thompson, this is a valuable antique. If you're thinking of selling it, I'd recommend going to a proper auction house or specialized dealer. I don't handle pieces of this caliber. He hesitated, then added, and if I may say so, you might want to be careful about where you got this. Items like this, they have histories, sometimes complicated ones. I felt a chill at his words. What do you mean? Just that valuable things are often attached to powerful people, and powerful people don't like losing their valuable things. He gave me a significant look. That's all I'm saying. I wrapped the brooch back up and returned it to my purse, thanking Mr. Rodriguez for his time. As I walked back home, his words echoed in my mind. Powerful people. The Blackwells were the most powerful family in Lexington, and Mark had worked for them for 30 years. For the first time, a suspicion began to form in my mind. A suspicion about where this brooch might have come from, and why Mark had hidden it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the brooch in its red wrapping. If what Mr. Rodriguez said was true, this piece was worth more than I earned in 2 years. And somehow my husband, a man who counted every dollar, who drove the same pickup truck for 15 years because he couldn't justify buying a new one, had this hidden in his nightstand. There was only one explanation that made any sense. The brooch belonged to the Blackwells. It had to. Maybe it was a family heirloom, something passed down through generations. The initials, CB, could that be Charles Blackwell, the patriarch who had built the family fortune back in the early 1900s? But if the brooch belonged to the Blackwells, how did Mark get it? And why keep it hidden? Had he stolen it? I couldn't believe that. Mark was the most honest man I'd ever known. He wouldn't take a paperclip that wasn't his, let alone a valuable piece of jewelry. So if he didn't steal it, how did he get it? Was it a gift? Payment for something? And that red lace underwear, where did that fit in? A thought hit me then, one that made my stomach turn. What if Mark had been involved with someone in the Blackwell family? A secret relationship, hidden all these years. The underwear could belong to... I couldn't even complete the thought. It was too painful. I stayed up half the night, my mind racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I needed more information, and there was only one person in town who might have it. Betty Williams had been the housekeeper at the main Blackwell house for over 40 years. She was a few years older than me, and we'd known each other casually for decades. The kind of acquaintance you see at the grocery store and exchange pleasantries with, but not a close friend. She lived in Pine Meadows, too, just a few streets over from me. If anyone knew the inner workings of the Blackwell family, it would be Betty. The next day was Friday, Betty's day off. I walked over to her house around 10 in the morning, rehearsing what I'd say. Her modest ranch-style home was well kept, with flower beds full of petunias and marigolds. I hesitated at the front door, wondering if this was a mistake, then finally rang the bell. Betty answered wearing a floral house dress, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked surprised to see me standing there. "Gloria, is everything all right?" "I hope I'm not disturbing you, Betty. I wonder if we could talk for a bit. It's about Mark and the Blackwells." Something flickered across her face. Concern? Wariness? But she stepped back and gestured me inside. "Come on in. I just made a fresh pot of coffee." Her living room was tidy and old-fashioned, with crocheted doilies on the armrests of the sofa and family photos arranged neatly on the wall. She led me to a small kitchen table by a window overlooking her backyard, where a bird feeder attracted cardinals and finches. "Cream and sugar?" she asked, pouring coffee into 2 matching mugs. "Just black, thanks." I settled into a chair, suddenly unsure how to begin. Betty sat across from me, her hands clasped around her mug. "I was sorry to hear about Mark. He was a good man." "Thank you." I took a deep breath. "Betty, I found something among Mark's things. Something that confused me. And I think it might have something to do with the Blackwells." She went very still, her face carefully blank. "What kind of thing?" Instead of answering, I reached into my purse and took out the box. I removed the brooch, unwrapped it from the red lace, and set it on the table between us. Betty's reaction told me everything. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and recognition. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. "In Mark's nightstand, hidden at the back." I watched her carefully. "You recognize it?" It wasn't a question. Betty nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the brooch. "That belongs to the Blackwells. It's one of their family heirlooms. It was commissioned by Charles Blackwell for his wife Catherine in the 1920s. Those are her initials on the back, CB. "How did Mark get it?" I asked, the question that had been burning in me since I'd found it. Betty's eyes finally rose to meet mine, and what I saw there was fear. "Gloria, you need to be very careful with this. The Blackwells, they're not people you want to cross." "I just want to understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why would my husband have this? And why was it wrapped in—" I gestured to the red lace. Betty sighed deeply, seeming to make a decision. "You deserve to know, but not here." She glanced around as if worried about being overheard in her own kitchen. "There's a coffee shop in Frankfurt, about 25 miles east. Moonlight Coffee, on Main Street. Meet me there tomorrow at 2. It's better if we're not seen talking about this in Lexington." Her caution frightened me more than anything else had so far. "Betty, you're scaring me. What's going on? What did Mark get himself into?" She reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Mark didn't do anything wrong, Gloria. That's important for you to understand. He was a good man caught up in something complicated. But the less you know right now, the safer you are." She glanced at the brooch. "Put that away, somewhere safe. Don't show it to anyone else, and for God's sake, don't tell anyone you have it. Not yet." I rewrapped the brooch and returned it to my purse, my hands shaking slightly. "I'll meet you tomorrow," I promised. As I walked home, Betty's warnings echoed in my head. The Blackwells weren't people you wanted to cross. Mark was caught up in something complicated. The less I knew, the safer I was. What had my quiet, hard-working husband been involved in? And what did a gold brooch with emerald eyes have to do with his death? I spent that night restless, moving through the house like a ghost, checking windows and doors, even though I'd never worried about such things before. The brooch, still wrapped in its red lace, was hidden in an old coffee can at the back of my pantry. Every few hours, I'd check to make sure it was still there, as if it might disappear on its own. By morning, I felt exhausted but resolute. I would meet Betty, hear what she had to say, and finally understand what Mark had been hiding from me all these years. I would learn the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Little did I know that the truth would be more dangerous than I could have imagined. That learning what that brooch really meant would put my life in danger. That within days of finding that hard thing in Mark's drawer, I would be running for my life, with powerful enemies determined to silence me and a dead husband's secrets threatening to destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. But that's how it happens, isn't it? The biggest changes start with the smallest discoveries. A stuck drawer, a hidden brooch, a secret kept for decades. And suddenly, nothing is what you thought it was. Not your husband, not your town, not even yourself. I was about to find out just how little I knew about the man I'd been married to for 40 years, and how far I would go to protect his memory once I learned the truth. The drive to Frankfurt that Saturday afternoon felt longer than the 25 miles it actually was. Every mile, my mind raced with questions about Mark, the brooch, and what Betty knew that made her so afraid. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me, a new paranoia I'd never experienced before. Moonlight Coffee was a small place tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on Main Street, the kind of cozy spot with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I arrived early, found a quiet table in the corner, and ordered a cup of tea I knew I wouldn't drink. My stomach was too knotted with worry. Betty arrived exactly at 2, wearing sunglasses and a scarf over her hair, looking like someone who didn't want to be recognized. She slid into the chair across from me without ordering anything. "Thank you for coming," she said in a low voice. "Did anyone follow you?" "Follow me? No, I don't think so." The question sent a chill through me. "Betty, what's going on? You're scaring me." She took a deep breath and removed her sunglasses. Her eyes looked tired, with dark circles beneath them. "I didn't sleep last night," she confessed, trying to decide how much to tell you. "But you deserve the truth, all of it, especially now that you have the brooch." She glanced around the cafe, making sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "That brooch belonged to Catherine Blackwell, Charles Blackwell's wife. It was made for her in 1925 as an anniversary gift. The emeralds came from Colombia, the gold from their own mines. It's been in the family for generations." "Then how did Mark get it?" Betty's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them on the table. "That's where it gets complicated. The brooch went missing in 1985 during a big party at the main house. The Blackwells were celebrating their 100th year in Kentucky. They had guests from all over, politicians, business partners, horse breeders. Everyone who was anyone in Lexington was there." "Mark would have been working there," I said, remembering that he'd been with the Blackwells since he was 16. "Yes, he was. He was 35 then, already their head horse handler. But that night, he wasn't in the stables. Robert Blackwell, he wasn't Dr. Robert back then, still in medical school, asked Mark to help serve drinks. They were short-staffed with so many guests." I tried to picture my husband in that grand house, among the wealthy and powerful, serving drinks in his simple clothes. It felt wrong somehow. "That night something happened," Betty continued. "Something terrible. Mark was bringing a tray of champagne to the library, where some of the men were smoking cigars and talking business. The door was slightly open. He heard raised voices. Charles Blackwell, the old patriarch, and his son-in-law, Edward Palmer, were arguing about money. Edward had married Charlotte, the Blackwells' only daughter." Betty paused to take a sip of water from my untouched glass. "Mark shouldn't have listened, but he did. Edward was accusing Charles of cheating him out of his share of the family business. Things got heated. Mark saw Edward push Charles, who was in his 70s by then, against a bookshelf. The old man fell, hit his head on the corner of a table, and didn't get up. My hand flew to my mouth. "He killed him?" Betty nodded grimly. "Edward panicked when he saw what he'd done. He didn't notice Mark watching through the door. He quickly arranged the scene to make it look like Charles had fallen on his own, an elderly man losing his balance. Then he took something from Charles's pocket, a key, and used it to open a cabinet. He took out a small box, opened it, and removed the brooch." "But why take the brooch?" "Because it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. On the back of the brooch, there's a small compartment. If you press the right spot, it opens. Inside was a microfilm with evidence of all the illegal activities the Blackwells had been involved in for decades. Tax evasion, bribes to officials, even blackmail. Charles had kept it as insurance against anyone in the family trying to push him out. Edward knew about it and wanted it destroyed." I sat back, stunned. How do you know all this? Because later that night, Mark told me everything. We were close back then. Betty looked away briefly, color rising in her cheeks. I worked in the main house as a maid. Mark and I had been seeing each other secretly for almost a year. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Mark and Betty. The red underwear suddenly made sense. It had been hers. My husband had been having an affair with this woman all those years ago. I felt sick, betrayed, but also confused. Mark and I had already been married for 10 years by 1985. You and Mark... I couldn't finish the sentence. I'm sorry, Gloria. I know this isn't easy to hear. It was wrong, what we did. We both knew it. But it happened. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to process this new pain on top of everything else. Go on, I finally said, my voice tight. Mark was terrified of what he'd seen. Edward Palmer had murdered Charles Blackwell, and Mark was the only witness. He knew if he came forward, no one would believe a black horse handler over Edward Palmer, who was married to the Blackwell fortune. But he also couldn't just pretend he hadn't seen anything. So he took the brooch, I guessed. Betty nodded. When everyone was dealing with Charles's accident, Mark slipped into the library. Edward had dropped the brooch in his panic when people started coming in. Mark found it on the floor behind a curtain. He knew what it was because Charles had shown it to him once, years before, when he was drunk and feeling sentimental about his wife. Mark took it and hid it in his quarters. Did Edward realize it was missing? Yes, almost immediately. There was a frantic search, but they tried to keep it quiet. They didn't want to admit publicly that such a valuable family heirloom was gone. Edward was beside himself, knowing the microfilm was missing too. He suspected Mark right away. He'd seen him near the library that night. But he couldn't accuse him without revealing what had really happened to Charles. So what happened? Edward started watching Mark closely, looking for any sign that he had the brooch. Mark knew he was suspected, so he asked me to hold on to it for a while. I kept it hidden in my room at the servants' quarters for about a year. She paused, looking genuinely remorseful. That's when Mark and I ended things. I was young, wanted more than he could give me. He was married to you, had responsibilities. We both agreed it was for the best. When we parted, I gave the brooch back to him, wrapped in something personal of mine. A reminder, I suppose. The red underwear, a painful token of their affair that my husband had kept hidden for decades. The thought made my chest ache. Mark kept the brooch hidden all these years, Betty continued. It was his insurance. As long as he had it, the Blackwells, especially Edward, wouldn't dare move against him. But it was a dangerous game. He lived with that fear for 35 years, Gloria, never knowing when they might find it, never able to truly feel safe. I thought about my quiet, hard-working husband carrying such a burden all those years, never telling me, protecting me from the danger by keeping me in the dark. What about Charles's death? Was it ruled an accident? Of course. The Blackwells own half the county, including most of the police force. It was quickly determined that the old man had suffered a stroke and fallen. No one questioned it publicly. And Edward? Is he still around? Oh, yes. Edward Palmer became one of the most powerful men in the Blackwell Empire after Charles's death. He and Charlotte had one son, James, who now runs their political connections and legal matters. Edward is in his 80s now, but still very much involved in family business. Their main home is in Florida these days, but they come back for the Derby season. My mind was racing, trying to process all this information. And what about Robert? Dr. Robert? Betty's expression darkened. Robert Blackwell was always the golden child. Went to the best schools, became a respected surgeon, then came back to take over the family horse breeding operation. Married a socialite from Virginia, had 2 perfect children. But behind the polished exterior, he's cut from the same cloth as the rest of them. Cold, calculating, willing to do whatever it takes to protect the family name and fortune. A terrible suspicion began forming in my mind. Betty, Mark's accident, was it really an accident? She met my eyes steadily. What do you think, Gloria? A chill ran through me. The horse. They said it got spooked and kicked him. Thoroughbreds can be unpredictable, Betty said carefully. But Mark had been handling horses for over 50 years. He knew every trick, every temperament. He could calm the most skittish stallion with just his voice. She paused. And it's interesting that it happened just 3 weeks after the Lexington Herald published that big exposé on political corruption in Kentucky. What does that have to do with anything? The article mentioned an anonymous source who claimed to have evidence of decades of illegal activities by some of the state's most prominent families. It specifically mentioned documentation dating back to the 1980s. The paper didn't name names, but anyone who knew anything about Kentucky power players could read between the lines. The implication was clear. After all these years, Mark had finally decided to come forward with what he knew, and it had cost him his life. Are you saying they killed my husband? My voice came out as a whisper. I'm saying that powerful people protect themselves, Gloria, and the Blackwells are very, very powerful. Betty reached across the table and gripped my hand. Which is why you need to be extremely careful now. You have the brooch. If they find out, you'll be in danger too. What should I do? Go to the police? Even as I said it, I remembered what Betty had told me about the Blackwells' influence over local law enforcement. Not the local police, she said, confirming my thoughts. They're in the Blackwells' pocket, but there might be someone who can help. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table to me. This is Daniel Reyes, an investigative reporter with the Louisville Courier-Journal. He wrote that exposé I mentioned. Mark had been in contact with him before the accident. I took the card, staring at the name and phone number. Mark never said anything to me about any of this. He was protecting you, Gloria. The less you knew, the safer you were. Betty glanced at her watch and stood up. I should go. I've been here too long already. Call that reporter if you want to pursue this. But think carefully about what you're getting into. The Blackwells don't forgive, and they don't forget. Before she left, she leaned down and whispered, check the back of the brooch. Press the emerald on the right side, the horse's eye. The compartment should still be there with the microfilm. That's what they really want. That's what Mark died for. She straightened up, put her sunglasses back on, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. I sat there alone, the business card in one hand, my cold tea in the other, feeling as if the ground had fallen away beneath me. My husband of 40 years had been keeping secrets I never imagined. An affair, a witness to murder, a keeper of evidence that could bring down one of Kentucky's most powerful families. And now I held that same dangerous evidence, making me a target for people who had already killed once, maybe twice, to protect it. The drive back to Lexington was a blur. My mind kept replaying Betty's words, trying to reconcile the Mark I thought I knew with this new version, a man caught up in decades of secrets and fear. I kept checking my rearview mirror, now genuinely worried about being followed. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen and retrieved the coffee can where I'd hidden the brooch. With trembling fingers, I unwrapped it from the red lace, trying not to think about what that fabric represented. I turned the brooch over and examined the back more carefully. Sure enough, there was a tiny seam around the base. I pressed the right emerald eye of the horse, and with a faint click, a small compartment opened. Inside was a tiny canister, no bigger than my pinky fingernail. I had to squint to make it out. A microfilm, just as Betty had said. Proof of decades of corruption by one of the state's most influential families. I sat at my kitchen table, the brooch and microfilm in front of me, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to forget everything I'd learned, return to my simple life of grieving widow and hospital cook. But another part of me, a stronger part, knew I couldn't ignore this. Mark had carried this burden alone for 35 years. He'd paid for it with his life. I couldn't let that be for nothing. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and dialed the number on Daniel Reyes's business card. A man answered on the third ring. Reyes speaking. "Mr. Reyes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "My name is Gloria Thompson. I'm the widow of Mark Thompson. I believe he was in contact with you before his death." There was a pause, then. "Mrs. Thompson, yes, I'm very sorry for your loss. Mr. Reyes, I found something that belonged to my husband, something about the Blackwell family. I think you should see it." Another pause. "Where are you calling from, Mrs. Thompson?" "My home in Lexington." "Don't say anything more on the phone, and don't stay there tonight. The Blackwells have ears everywhere." His voice lowered. "There's a Holiday Inn off I-75 at the Hamburg exit. Get a room there under a different name. I can meet you tomorrow morning at 9, room number 112 if they have it available. If not, text me the room number." "It text you? I don't know how to." "Just get to the hotel, Mrs. Thompson. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Don't use your credit card, pay cash, and bring what you found with you." He hesitated, then added, "Your husband was a brave man, Mrs. Thompson. He was trying to do the right thing." "I'm starting to understand that," I said quietly. After hanging up, I sat motionless for several minutes, trying to grasp the reality of what I was about to do. Then, with a newfound determination, I went to my bedroom and packed an overnight bag. I put the brooch and microfilm in a small pouch and tucked it into my bra, the safest place I could think of. Before leaving, I looked around my little house one more time, the house Mark and I had shared for decades. It suddenly felt like a stranger's home, filled with memories that were somehow both real and false at the same time. How much of our life together had been genuine? How much had been overshadowed by Mark's secrets? As I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed a black SUV parked at the end of the street. It hadn't been there earlier. My heart jumped into my throat when the engine started as soon as my car began moving. In my rearview mirror, I could see it pulling out, keeping a careful distance behind me. Someone was following me. The Blackwells already knew. A cold fear gripped me, but alongside it rose something unexpected, a fierce determination. My quiet life had been shattered the moment I found that brooch. Now I had a choice: cower in fear or stand up and fight for the truth, for Mark's memory, for justice. I made a sudden turn at the next intersection, then another, trying to lose the SUV. It stayed with me, maintaining the same distance. These weren't amateurs. They knew what they were doing. I remembered something Mark had taught me years ago when he was teaching me to drive. "If you ever think someone's following you," he'd said, "don't go where you're planning to go. Head somewhere public, with lots of people." The mall. It was Saturday evening. The Fayette Mall would be crowded. I stepped on the gas, heading for Nicholasville Road. The SUV sped up too, getting closer now that they realized I was trying to evade them. As I pulled into the mall parking lot, weaving through rows of cars, I spotted a police cruiser near the main entrance. For a split second, I considered asking for help. Then I remembered what Betty had said about the local police being in the Blackwell's pocket. I drove past the cruiser and pulled into a space near a group of teenagers heading inside. Grabbing my purse, I locked the car and hurried after them, trying to blend in with the Saturday shoppers. Through the glass doors, I could see the black SUV cruising slowly through the parking lot, looking for me. Inside the mall, I moved quickly, head down, making my way through the crowds. I found a department store with an exit to another parking area and slipped out, hailed a taxi, and gave the driver the address of the Holiday Inn. As we drove away from the mall, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. At 66 years old, I was on the run, carrying evidence of murder and corruption, being chased by powerful enemies. It was like something from a movie, not the life of a hospital cook from Lexington, Kentucky. But this was my reality now. In that moment, I made a promise to myself and to Mark. I would see this through. I would make sure the truth came out, no matter what it cost me. He had carried this burden alone for 35 years. Now it was my turn to carry it the rest of the way. The brooch pressed against my skin, a constant reminder of what was at stake. As the taxi merged onto the highway, I watched the city lights of Lexington fade behind me, wondering if I would ever see my home again. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: my life would never be the same. The moment I found that hard thing in Mark's drawer, everything had changed, and there was no going back. The Holiday Inn off I-75 was a nondescript building, the kind you'd pass 100 times without really noticing. I paid cash for the room as Daniel Reyes had instructed, using the name Margaret Wilson, my mother's maiden name. The desk clerk barely looked at me, just another older woman checking in on a Saturday night, probably visiting grandchildren or attending a church conference. Room 112 was on the ground floor, facing the parking lot. I kept the curtains drawn and the television on low, more for the comforting background noise than for entertainment. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the armchair by the window, occasionally peeking through the curtains, watching for that black SUV or any other vehicle that might linger too long. The brooch and microfilm remained hidden in the small pouch tucked into my bra. Every so often, I'd check to make sure it was still there, the hard metal pressing against my skin, a constant reminder of my new reality. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally overtook vigilance, and I dozed off in the chair. I dreamed of Mark, not the Mark of our last years together, but the younger man I'd married. In my dream, he was trying to tell me something important, but I couldn't hear his words. His face kept changing, shifting between the man I'd known and someone unfamiliar, someone with Betty's eyes. I woke with a start at 6:30, my neck stiff from sleeping upright, my heart racing with the remnants of the dream. By 8:30, I'd showered, dressed, and was on my third cup of complimentary coffee from the room's tiny machine. At precisely 9 a.m., there was a soft knock on the door. "Who is it?" I called, standing well back from the entrance. "Daniel Reyes," came the reply. "Louisville Courier-Journal." Still cautious, I peered through the peephole. A man in his mid-30s stood there, medium height, with dark hair and glasses, wearing jeans and a button-up shirt under a light jacket. He looked nothing like I'd imagined, younger, less intimidating. He held up a press badge to the peephole. I opened the door just enough to let him slip inside, then quickly locked it behind him. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for contacting me. I was very sorry to hear about Mark." His voice carried a hint of an accent I couldn't place, and his eyes were kind but watchful, scanning the room as he spoke. "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the small table by the window. "Would you like some coffee? It's not very good, but it's hot." "No, thank you." He took a seat, placing a leather messenger bag on the floor beside him. "Mrs. Thompson, before we begin, I need to ask, are you being followed?" The directness of the question caught me off guard, though it shouldn't have. "Yes, I think so. Yesterday, leaving my house, a black SUV. I managed to lose them at the mall, but—" I trailed off, the reality of my situation suddenly overwhelming. Daniel nodded gravely. "The Blackwells don't waste time. Did you bring what you found?" I reached into my bra and removed the small pouch, placing it on the table between us. Daniel didn't reach for it immediately, instead looking at me intently. "Mrs. Thompson, I want you to understand what you're getting into. Your husband was working with me on a story that could bring down not just the Blackwells, but a network of corruption that extends throughout Kentucky politics. We're talking about powerful people who have gotten away with everything from tax fraud to murder for generations. Once we open this box, there's no going back." "I understand," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Mark kept this secret for 35 years. He died for it. I need to know why." Daniel nodded, then carefully opened the pouch and removed the brooch. He examined it with professional detachment, noting the craftsmanship, the emerald eyes, the initials on the back. When I showed him how to press the eye to open the compartment, a small smile of satisfaction crossed his face. "The microfilm," he said softly, almost reverently, as he extracted the tiny canister. "Mark told me about this, but I wasn't sure if it still existed. He looked up at me. Do you know what's on it? Records of the Blackwell's illegal activities going back decades. At least, that's what I was told. Who told you this? I hesitated, not wanting to implicate Betty, but knowing that honesty was crucial now. Betty Williams. She is, the Blackwell's housekeeper. She and Mark were close many years ago. A flicker of recognition crossed Daniel's face. Betty Williams. Yes, Mark mentioned her, though not the nature of their relationship. She's taking a significant risk by talking to you. I think she feels she owes it to Mark. Daniel carefully returned the microfilm to its hiding place and closed the compartment. Mrs. Thompson, this microfilm is evidence in crimes that span decades. It needs to be properly documented, analyzed by experts, and protected. I have contacts at the FBI who specialize in public corruption cases. With your permission, I'd like to take this to them. The FBI? I hadn't considered that this would go beyond Kentucky, beyond the Courier-Journal's exposé. But of course it would. The Blackwell's influence might extend to local police, but surely not to federal authorities. Yes, this case is too big, too dangerous for just journalistic coverage. We need federal protection and resources. He paused. And you need protection too. If the Blackwells know you have the brooch and microfilm, and we have to assume they do, your life is in danger. The reality of my situation hit me anew. I was a 66-year-old widow, a hospital cook who had lived a quiet, unremarkable life until a week ago. Now I was discussing FBI protection from a powerful family that might want me dead. It seemed absurd, like something from a movie, not my life. What would that mean? Protection? I asked. Temporary relocation, possibly. A safe house until we can process the evidence and make arrests. It won't be forever, Mrs. Thompson, but it's necessary. He hesitated. I won't lie to you. This will disrupt your life completely for a while. But the alternative is, well, the Blackwells have a lot to lose. I thought about my little house in Pine Meadows, my job at the hospital, my few friends and routines. What was I giving up? But then I thought about Mark, carrying this burden alone for 35 years, never feeling truly safe. He had sacrificed so much for the truth. Could I do any less? I'll do whatever is necessary, I said finally. But I want to know everything. I want to understand what Mark was involved in, what he died for. Daniel nodded. I'll tell you everything I know, and as we analyze the microfilm, I'm sure we'll learn more. He glanced at his watch. We should get moving. My contact at the FBI is meeting us in Louisville in 3 hours. Do you have a car here? Yes, but they might be looking for it. We'll take mine. It's a rental under a different name. He began gathering his things. Pack only what you absolutely need. We need to leave in 15 minutes. As I quickly gathered my few belongings, Daniel made a series of calls, speaking in low, urgent tones. I caught fragments. Witness protection, microfilm evidence, Blackwell case. Okay, each phrase underscoring the gravity of my situation. Within 20 minutes, we were on the road, heading toward Louisville. Daniel drove carefully, regularly checking the rearview mirror for any signs of pursuit. The brooch and microfilm were secure in an inner pocket of his leather bag, which he kept between us on the console. Tell me about Mark, Daniel said as we drove. What was he like at home, away from the Blackwells? The question surprised me. It wasn't about the case or the danger we were in, but about my husband as a person. I found myself talking about Mark's quiet strength, his patience, his love of Western novels and baseball games on the radio. The small details of our life together that had nothing to do with secrets or brooches or murder. He sounds like a good man, Daniel said when I finished. A complicated one, but good. He was, I agreed. Even with his secrets, even with... I trailed off, still unable to fully articulate the betrayal I felt about Mark's affair with Betty. He tried to do the right thing, in his own way. "And now you're carrying on that fight," Daniel observed. "That takes courage, Mrs. Thompson." I hadn't thought of myself as courageous. I was simply following the path that had opened before me when I found that brooch. But perhaps that was what courage looked like sometimes. Not grand heroic gestures, but simply putting one foot in front of the other when the path grew dark and uncertain. As we approached Louisville, Daniel became more alert, checking his mirrors more frequently. "We're being followed," he said calmly. Too calmly for the words he was speaking. "Black sedan, 2 cars back. Been with us since we passed the exit for Frankfurt." My heart hammered in my chest. The Blackwells? Probably. They have resources. He took a sudden exit, then another, weaving through side streets with practiced ease. The sedan stayed with us, closing the distance. "Mrs. Thompson, if anything happens, take my bag and run. My FBI contact is at the Seelbach Hotel downtown. Ask for Agent Phillips at the front desk." "What do you mean, if anything happens?" I clutched the armrest as Daniel accelerated through a yellow light. "Just a precaution." He made another sharp turn, then pulled into the parking garage of a large shopping center. "We need to switch vehicles. I have a backup plan." The parking garage was busy with weekend shoppers, providing some cover as Daniel guided me quickly through the rows of cars. The black sedan appeared at the entrance to the garage, moving slowly as the occupants scanned for us. "This way," Daniel whispered, leading me behind a large SUV. He pulled out his phone, sent a quick text, then looked at me. "My colleague is bringing another car to the north exit. We just need to stay hidden for 3 minutes." Those 3 minutes felt like hours. We crouched between vehicles, moving when necessary, always keeping concrete pillars or large cars between us and the searching sedan. I could see 2 men inside, one driving, one scanning the garage. Both wore dark suits and sunglasses, like caricatures of what I imagined professional killers would look like. Except this wasn't a movie, and the fear in my chest was very real. Finally, a silver compact car pulled up near the north exit. A woman with short blonde hair waved briefly from the driver's seat. "That's our ride," Daniel said. "When I say go, we walk, don't run, to that car. Act natural like we're just shoppers heading to our vehicle." I nodded, trying to calm my racing heart. "Go." We emerged from our hiding spot and walked at a measured pace toward the silver car. I felt exposed, certain that at any moment I would hear shouts or worse, gunshots. But we reached the car without incident, slipping into the back seat as the blonde woman immediately pulled away. "Gloria Thompson, this is Natalie Chen, my colleague at the Courier-Journal," Daniel said. "Natalie, Mrs. Thompson has the evidence we've been looking for." "Nice to meet you," Natalie said, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "We've got company, by the way. Black sedan, just exited the garage. Head for the Federal Building," Daniel instructed. "Directly, no detours. We need to get there before they make a move." Natalie drove skillfully through downtown Louisville traffic, taking turns that seemed random to me, but apparently followed some strategy. The black sedan stayed with us, sometimes close, sometimes dropping back, but never disappearing. "They're just tracking us now," Daniel explained, noting my nervous glances behind us. "They won't try anything in broad daylight in downtown Louisville. Too many witnesses. They want to know where we're going, who we're meeting." "Won't they follow us to your FBI contact?" I asked. "That's the plan," Daniel said with a tight smile. "Agent Phillips has a team ready. Once we enter federal property with the evidence, the Blackwells lose their advantage. Their only play was to intercept us before we got there." The Louisville Federal Building was an imposing structure of glass and steel. Natalie pulled up directly to the entrance, where 2 men in suits were already waiting. One opened my door immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Special Agent Phillips. Please come with me. We've been expecting you." Everything happened quickly after that. We were escorted through security and into a conference room where several other agents waited. The brooch and microfilm were carefully documented, photographed, and secured in an evidence bag. I gave a preliminary statement about how I had found the brooch, my conversation with Betty, and the apparent surveillance by the Blackwells. "Mrs. Thompson," Agent Phillips said when I'd finished. "Based on what you've told us and the evidence you've provided, we believe there is a credible threat to your safety. I'm recommending immediate placement in our witness security program, at least temporarily, until we can process this evidence and make arrests." "Witness protection," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "You mean a new identity? A new place to live?" "For now, yes. A temporary relocation and identity. We'll have you back home as soon as it's safe, but that could take several months." Several months away from my home, my job, my few friends, living somewhere strange with a different name. It seemed impossible, unreal. But what choice did I have? "What about my house? My job?" I asked. "We'll secure your property, and we can arrange a leave of absence from your job. Medical reasons, family emergency, something plausible. Your bills will be covered during this time." Agent Phillips's tone was professional, but not unkind. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this is overwhelming, but the evidence you've brought us, this microfilm, it could be the key to bringing down a corruption network that has operated with impunity for generations. What you and your late husband have done is incredibly important." I thought about Mark, keeping his secret for 35 years, always looking over his shoulder. I thought about Charles Blackwell, murdered by his son-in-law Edward Palmer, and how that crime had gone unpunished for decades. I thought about my husband's accident with the horse, another murder it seemed increasingly likely, to silence him when he finally decided to come forward. "I'll do it," I said firmly, "whatever it takes to see this through, for Mark." Agent Phillips nodded. "Thank you. We'll begin arrangements immediately." As the agents left to make calls and prepare paperwork, Daniel Reyes stayed behind. "Mrs. Thompson, Gloria, I want you to know how much I admired your husband. He was a brave man. When he contacted me about the Blackwells, he knew the risks, but he believed the truth needed to come out." "When did he contact you?" I asked, suddenly realizing I didn't know when Mark had made the decision to break his 35 years of silence. "About 2 months before he died. He didn't tell me everything at first, just that he had evidence of corruption involving the Blackwells going back decades. We met several times, always in public places, always carefully. He was cautious, but determined." Daniel hesitated. "The last time we spoke was 3 days before his accident. He told me he was ready to turn over something physical, which I now know was the brooch and microfilm. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, but—" He trailed off, the implication clear. "They killed him before he could give it to you," I finished for him. Daniel nodded solemnly. "I believe so, yes. The timing is too convenient. That exposé I published. It was based partly on what Mark had told me, though I protected him as a source. When it came out, it must have spooked the Blackwells. They must have suspected he was talking to someone." A cold anger settled in my chest. My husband had been murdered for trying to do the right thing, for finally deciding to expose a crime he had witnessed decades ago. He'd carried that burden alone for so long, and when he'd finally chosen to set it down, it had cost him his life. "I want them to pay," I said quietly. "All of them. For what they did to Charles Blackwell, for what they did to Mark, for all of it." "They will," Daniel assured me. "The FBI has been building a case against the Blackwell network for years, but they've never had enough hard evidence to move forward. What you've brought them could be the missing piece." He reached across the table and briefly squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing, Gloria. It's dangerous and difficult, but it's right." That evening, I was escorted to a safe house outside Louisville, a modest ranch-style home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Agent Phillips explained that I would stay there for a few days while they arranged my temporary relocation and new identity. 2 agents would remain with me at all times, and the house had surveillance cameras and alarm systems. As I settled into the unfamiliar bedroom that night, I found myself thinking about Betty Williams and our conversation in the Frankfurt coffee shop. She had taken a risk telling me what she knew, breaking decades of silence. Was she safe? Or had the Blackwells already connected her to me? I mentioned my concerns to Agent Phillips the next morning. "We've been monitoring the situation," he said carefully. "Ms. Williams left her home yesterday afternoon with several suitcases. She told a neighbor she was going to visit her sister in Ohio for an extended stay. We believe she's taking precautions of her own." I felt relieved that Betty had the foresight to leave, but worried for her nonetheless. How many lives had the Blackwells disrupted or destroyed over the years? How many people had lived in fear of them, keeping their secrets, looking over their shoulders? Over the next few days, I was interviewed extensively by FBI agents. I told them everything: finding the brooch, my conversation with Betty, the apparent surveillance by Blackwell operatives. Scientists carefully extracted and developed the microfilm, revealing decades of meticulous records: dates, amounts, names, transactions. Charles Blackwell had documented everything: bribes to officials, tax evasion schemes, fraudulent business practices, even the blackmail of judges and politicians. It was a roadmap of corruption that stretched from Lexington to Frankfurt to Washington, D.C. "This is extraordinary," Agent Phillips told me after they'd processed the microfilm. Charles Blackwell was essentially creating an insurance policy against his own family. He documented everything, including family meetings where these schemes were discussed. There are entries here about Edward Palmer's increasing demands for more control, more money. The last entry is dated just 2 days before Blackwell's death. A week after my arrival at the safe house, my temporary relocation was arranged. I would be moving to a small town in the Pacific Northwest with a new name, Eleanor Wilson, and a cover story as a recently widowed retiree moving closer to fictional family. The FBI had arranged an apartment, a modest monthly stipend, and a backstory complete with altered identification documents. The night before I was to leave Kentucky, perhaps forever, Agent Phillips brought me a visitor, Daniel Reyes. "I wanted to say goodbye," Daniel explained, sitting across from me at the safe house kitchen table, "and to let you know that the story is going to press next week. The FBI has given us clearance to publish certain aspects of the case now that they've made their first arrests." "Arrests?" This was news to me. "Who?" "James Palmer, Edward's son, and 2 associates. They were picked up yesterday, charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. It's just the beginning. The FBI is moving carefully, building cases against each member of the network." "What about Edward Palmer? He's the one who killed Charles Blackwell." Daniel exchanged a glance with Agent Phillips. "Edward Palmer suffered a stroke 3 days ago. He's in intensive care at Lexington Memorial. The doctors aren't optimistic about his recovery." I felt an odd mix of emotions at this news. Part of me wanted Edward Palmer to live, to face justice for what he'd done. Another part felt that a quick death was too easy an escape for decades of corruption and murder. And the Blackwells? Robert? His family? "Robert Blackwell and his wife left the country 2 days ago," Agent Phillips interjected. "Private jet to Switzerland. We're monitoring the situation, but frankly, we expected this. They're running, which tells us they know what's coming. We'll get them eventually." I thought about Dr. Robert standing at Mark's funeral, giving that heartfelt speech about my husband's decades of service and loyalty. All while knowing, or at least suspecting, that Mark had witnessed his Uncle Edward murder his grandfather. All while perhaps having ordered Mark's death himself. The hypocrisy was staggering. "Will I ever be able to go home?" I asked, the question that had been weighing on me all week. "Yes," Agent Phillips said firmly. "Once the major players are in custody or otherwise neutralized, and the immediate danger has passed. It could be several months, possibly longer. But this is temporary, Mrs. Thompson. We will get you home eventually." "Home to what? My little house in Pine Meadows? My job at the hospital?" The life I had known was gone, transformed irrevocably the moment I found that brooch wrapped in red lace. I wasn't just Gloria Thompson, widow and hospital cook anymore. I was a witness, a target, a keeper of dangerous secrets, just as Mark had been for 35 years. "The story we're publishing won't mention you by name," Daniel assured me. "You'll be referred to as a confidential source who provided key evidence. Your role will be protected." I appreciated the thought, but it seemed almost beside the point now. My life had already changed completely. Whether my name appeared in the newspaper or not wouldn't change that. The next morning, I left Kentucky with 2 federal agents, flying first to Chicago, then Seattle, then driving to the small coastal town that would be my home for the foreseeable future. As the plane took off from Louisville, I looked down at the rolling hills and horse farms of Kentucky growing smaller below me. Somewhere down there was my home, my life, my husband's grave. I wondered if I would ever see any of it again. In that moment, flying away from everything I had ever known, I made a promise to myself and to Mark. This wouldn't be the end of our story. Somehow, someday, I would return to Kentucky. I would see justice done for my husband, for Charles Blackwell, for all those who had suffered under the Blackwells' corrupt influence. The brooch with emerald eyes had changed my life forever. But perhaps that had been its purpose all along, to ensure that eventually, inevitably, the truth would come to light. As we descended toward Seattle, rain streaking the airplane windows, I thought about the strange journey ahead. A new name, a new town, a new life, if only temporarily. At 66 years old, I was starting over, carrying the weight of secrets and evidence that had already cost at least 2 lives. But I wasn't alone anymore. Unlike Mark, who had carried his burden in solitude for decades, I had allies now: the FBI, Daniel Reyes and his newspaper, perhaps even Betty Williams in her own way. Together, we would bring the truth to light, no matter how powerful the forces aligned against us. The hard thing I had found in my husband's drawer had set me on this path. Now I would see it through to the end, whatever that might be. 9 months passed in my temporary exile in the Pacific Northwest. 9 months of living as Eleanor Wilson, a widow who had moved to be closer to family. 9 months of watching the news unfold from afar, as the case against the Blackwells and their network of corruption steadily built. 9 months of missing my home, my job at the hospital, my small but meaningful life in Lexington. The town where they placed me was a small coastal community in Oregon. Pleasant enough, with friendly people and beautiful scenery, rocky beaches, tall pines, misty mornings. My apartment was simple but comfortable, overlooking a small harbor where fishing boats came and went with the tides. I found work in a local diner just to keep busy. The cook's job was familiar territory, though the menu was different. More seafood, less fried chicken than what I'd prepared in Kentucky. The FBI provided regular updates on the case. Agent Phillips called me every 2 weeks, always from a different number, always careful with his words. The investigation was expanding, he told me, reaching into state politics, federal agencies, even into neighboring states. The microfilm evidence had been the key that unlocked decades of corruption, just as Mark had hoped when he finally decided to come forward. Daniel Reyes and his newspaper published a series of explosive articles, carefully coordinated with the FBI to avoid compromising the ongoing investigation. The stories never mentioned me by name, referring only to a confidential source who provided key evidence. But the details were there: the brooch with emerald eyes, the 35-year cover-up of Charles Blackwell's murder, the suspicious death of a longtime horse handler. Anyone in Lexington who knew Mark would recognize him in the story. In April, almost a year after Mark's death, I received a call from Agent Phillips that made my heart race. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, using my real name instead of my cover identity, "we've made significant progress. Edward Palmer has died. Robert Blackwell has been indicted on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder, among others. We've also arrested 16 other individuals connected to their operation, including 2 judges and a state representative." I sat down heavily on my couch, staring out at the gray Oregon sky. What does this mean for me? It means we believe the immediate threat to your safety has diminished substantially. The major players have been neutralized, either through arrests or other circumstances. We're prepared to begin the process of returning you to Kentucky, if that's what you want. if that's what I wanted. For months, I'd dreamed of going home, returning to my little house in Pine Meadows, seeing the familiar streets of Lexington again. But now that the possibility was real, I felt a strange hesitation. The Gloria Thompson who had left Kentucky was not the same woman who would be returning. I had changed, grown stronger in ways I never imagined possible at my age. Yes, I said finally. I want to go home. The process took another 6 weeks. Paperwork, arrangements, security protocols. By early June, I was on a plane back to Kentucky, accompanied by Agent Phillips and another FBI agent whose name I never learned. As the aircraft descended toward Lexington, I pressed my face to the window, watching the familiar landscape of rolling hills and horse farms emerge from the clouds. My eyes filled with tears. Whatever happened next, I was home. My house in Pine Meadows had been maintained in my absence. Lawn mowed, mail collected, a minimal cleaning service once a month. It felt both familiar and strange as I walked through the front door. Everything was just as I had left it nearly a year ago, and yet everything had changed. I ran my fingers over the kitchen counter, looked at Mark's photo still hanging on the wall, peered into the bedroom where I had found the brooch that had changed everything. The house has been swept for surveillance devices, Agent Phillips assured me. We'll keep a security detail in the neighborhood for the next few weeks, just as a precaution. And you have my direct number if anything concerns you. What about my job at the hospital? I asked. Your position is still available. We arranged a medical leave of absence. They think you've been receiving treatment for a heart condition. You can return whenever you feel ready. I nodded, grateful for the thoroughness of their arrangements. After the agents left, I stood alone in my living room, listening to the silence. For the first time in a year, I was truly alone, truly myself again. I was Gloria Thompson, not Eleanor Wilson. I was home. The next morning, I decided to visit Mark's grave. It was something I had thought about often during my months away. The cemetery was on the outskirts of Lexington, a peaceful place with old trees and well-maintained grounds. I brought a simple bouquet of wildflowers, nothing fancy, just like Mark. His headstone was modest, just as we had planned years ago when we bought the cemetery plots. Mark Thompson, 1950-2024, beloved husband. Nothing about his 30 years of service to the Blackwells, nothing about his role as a witness to murder, nothing about his final act of courage that had cost him his life. I sat on the small bench near his grave, placing the flowers in the metal vase embedded in the ground. I'm back, Mark, I said softly. I've been away for a while, but I'm home now. A lot has happened. That secret you kept for so long, it's out now. The truth about the Blackwells, about what Edward Palmer did to Charles Blackwell, about everything. They can't hurt anyone anymore. A breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby oak tree. I like to think it was Mark, somehow, acknowledging my words. I found the brooch, I continued. I know about Betty, too. I paused, still finding that particular revelation painful. I understand why you kept it all secret. You were protecting me. And in the end, you decided to do the right thing, no matter the cost. You were braver than I ever knew. I sat there for a long time, talking to Mark as if he could hear me, telling him about Oregon, about the investigation, about coming home. It felt good to share it all, even if only with a headstone and the Kentucky breeze. As I was preparing to leave, I noticed someone watching me from a distance, a woman standing beneath a tree, hesitant, as if unsure whether to approach. I recognized her immediately. Betty Williams. She walked toward me slowly, looking older than when I'd last seen her nearly a year ago. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her dress simple but elegant. She carried a small bouquet of yellow roses. "Gloria," she said when she reached me, "I heard you were back." Betty, I wasn't sure what to feel. Anger over her past with Mark, gratitude for her help when I needed it, or something more complicated than either. "I've been coming here every month," she said, looking at Mark's grave. "Bringing flowers, talking to him. I hope you don't mind." I did mind, in a way. This was my husband, not hers. But I also understood now that life was rarely simple, relationships rarely straightforward. Mark had been important to both of us, in different ways. "How are you?" I asked instead of answering directly. "Where have you been?" "Ohio, with my sister, like I told my neighbor. Then, when things got serious with the arrests, the FBI contacted me. I've been in witness protection, too, in Arizona. Just got back last week." She placed her yellow roses next to my wildflowers. "I've been following the case as much as I could. It's all coming out now, isn't it? Everything Charles Blackwell documented, everything Mark knew." I nodded. "The trial starts next month. Robert Blackwell, James Palmer, the others. They want me to testify." "Me too," Betty said, "about what I knew about the night Charles died." She looked at me directly for the first time. "Gloria, I owe you an apology. About Mark, about what happened between us. It was wrong, and I've carried that guilt for a long time." I studied her face, the lined skin, the tired eyes, the genuine remorse I saw there. What good would holding on to anger do now? Mark was gone. The truth was out. We had both, in our different ways, helped bring justice for his death. "It was a long time ago," I said finally, "and in the end, you helped me when it mattered." She nodded, a weight seeming to lift from her shoulders. We stood there in silence for a moment, two aging women at the grave of a man who had connected our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined. "Would you like to get coffee somewhere?" Betty asked eventually. "There's more I could tell you about the case, about what's happening with the Blackwell properties." I hesitated, then nodded. "There's that place on Main Street, Madison's. They make good pie." "I know it well." As we walked back to our respective cars, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. Not closure, I didn't think that would ever come completely, but a kind of acceptance. Mark's secrets had created ripples that extended far beyond our marriage, our home, our quiet life. Those ripples had touched and changed many lives, including my own. At Madison's coffee shop, over apple pie and strong coffee, Betty filled me in on the local aftermath of the Blackwell scandal. Willow Creek Farm had been seized by the government as part of the case. Its valuable horses sold at auction, the proceeds held in escrow pending the outcome of the trial. The Blackwell mansion stood empty, its future uncertain. Many in Lexington who had depended on the Blackwells for their livelihoods, directly or indirectly, were struggling to adjust to the new reality. "The town is different now," Betty said. "The old power structure is gone. Some people are relieved, others are resentful. But everyone's talking about it, about the corruption, about how it went on for so long." "And about Mark?" I asked. "Yes, about Mark too. The articles didn't name him, but everyone knows. Some call him a hero for what he did. Others—" She trailed off. "Others think he should have come forward sooner," I finished for her. "That he was complicit by keeping silent all those years." Betty nodded. "People want simple stories, clear heroes and villains. But real life isn't like that, is it? Mark did what he thought was right at the time. He protected himself, protected you, and in the end, he tried to make it right, even knowing what it might cost him." I thought about that as I sipped my coffee. The moral complexity of Mark's choices, of Betty's, of my own. None of us were purely heroes or villains, just flawed human beings trying to navigate difficult situations as best we could. "What will you do now?" Betty asked after a while. "Will you stay in Lexington?" It was a question I'd been asking myself since my return. "I think so," I said slowly. "This is my home. I have my house, my job at the hospital if I want it. But everything feels different now." "It is different." "You're different." Betty studied me across the table. "You know, Gloria, you've changed. There's a strength in you now that wasn't there before." I considered this. Perhaps she was right. The woman who had found a brooch in her husband's drawer, who had followed that discovery to the truth no matter where it led, who had lived in exile and was now prepared to testify against some of the most powerful people in Kentucky. That woman was not the same as the quiet hospital cook who had been content to live in the shadow of her husband's secrets. "Life changes us," I said simply. "Ready or not." In the weeks that followed, I slowly reintegrated into life in Lexington. I returned to my job at the hospital, where my colleagues welcomed me back with concern about my heart condition and curiosity about my extended absence. I attended a church service, reconnected with my few close friends, and began the process of living alone again in the house Mark and I had shared for decades. The brooch itself was still in FBI custody as evidence, but they had provided me with high-quality photographs of it. Sometimes, in the evening, I would look at those images, the golden horse with emerald eyes that had changed so many lives. I kept them in the same drawer where Mark had hidden the real thing, a reminder of how a single discovery could alter everything. As the trial approached, I met regularly with federal prosecutors to prepare my testimony. I would be a key witness, they told me, establishing the chain of custody for the brooch and microfilm, explaining how I had found it after Mark's death and what had happened afterward. Betty would testify about the night Charles Blackwell was murdered, about what Mark had witnessed and what Edward Palmer had done. Together, our testimonies would help bring justice for crimes that had gone unpunished for nearly 40 years. The night before I was scheduled to testify, I sat on my back porch watching the summer sun set over Pine Meadows. A year had passed since Mark's death, since I had found that brooch hidden in his drawer. In that year, I had lost my husband, discovered his secrets, fled my home, lived under a false identity, and returned to help bring down one of Kentucky's most powerful families. At 67 years old, I had experienced more drama and danger than in all my previous decades combined, and yet I felt at peace. Whatever happened in the courtroom tomorrow, whatever the outcome of the trial, I had done what I needed to do. I had honored Mark's final choice to come forward with the truth. I had faced my own fears and found strength I never knew I possessed. I had discovered that even at my age, life could still surprise me, challenge me, change me. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared above Lexington, I made a silent promise to myself. I would testify truthfully tomorrow, facing Robert Blackwell and the others across the courtroom. I would help bring justice for Charles Blackwell, for Mark, and for all those who had suffered under the Blackwells' corrupt influence. And then I would move forward with whatever life had left to offer me. Older now, wiser, stronger, but still open to whatever might come next. The brooch with emerald eyes had started this journey, but I would be the one to finish it on my own terms. And now, from where are you listening to this story?